Yes, welcome in. Badgers getting ready for a visit from Iowa coming up on Saturday night. They are 3.5-point underdogs at home. I thought this might be a game where you potentially that spreads a little bit lower, but again, Wisconsin perhaps hasn't played to deserve that at all, right? I think we can both agree with that. I thought that it potentially might have been the last game that they might have been favored in. Clearly not. But they do have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and they spent all offseason talking about it. 42-10, 300-plus yards rushing. We'll get into that probably more on Thursday, talk about some of what Wisconsin has done this offseason to try and flip the script, I guess you could say, from what happened in Iowa City was that November, late October? Where they just got torn up. We'll get more to that on Thursday. Plenty to get to here in this show. Going to be talking about the on-field impact, or say the off-field impact of their on-field product, especially in recruiting. And Amari Latimer, that was the big story this weekend. He took a visit to Ohio State. You had a chance to talk to his dad. You put out a story at BadgerConnect.com. We'll talk about that and just the impact of Wisconsin's on-field product right now impacting them off. We'll also get into a little bit of evaluating the coaching, because Luke Fickell talked about at his press conference on Monday that you evaluate coaches based on whether they can get guys to play above their God-given ability. And kind of just wondering if any coach is doing it at this point, and maybe a bigger picture, because it is only 5 games, maybe a bigger picture of what's happened for Luke Fickell here so far in 2.5 years. And then we'll finish a little overreaction or no, and perhaps get some stuff off our chest, specifically my chest, about the Nyzier Fourqurean situation. But Jesse, let's perhaps start. Before we jump into that, as always, in case you're listening, we do have a YouTube channel, the Camp YouTube. Go up, check it out. Post all of our episodes up there. Post some player interviews as well. And we would really appreciate it. Subscribe. It helps the show and allows us to continue doing what we're doing here. So with that said, let's jump into a little bit of the impact that Wisconsin's play in the field has had. Wisconsin 2-3. They've lost 3 straight. They haven't beaten a Power 4 opponent in almost a year. Their lead, that 7-0 lead on Saturday against Michigan, was their first against Power 4 opponent since Oregon last year. So things have not necessarily been going great on the field. It did, like, the on-field impact was not impacted by the first 2 classes of recruits, still top 25 classes. This class a little bit lower, and their 2 highest commits, Amari Latimer, Jaden Pettit, running back, wide receiver, both have certainly still been in contact with other schools. And again, it was the big story this weekend, Jesse, that Amari Latimer visited Ohio State, took in their game against Minnesota. You had a chance to talk with his dad, and you put out a story at Badger Connect.
I did. There's a lot of areas we can address. I'll start with the Latimer one, since it's the big story over the weekend, and we can get into the general impact of this performance this program's had on recruiting as a whole. So, yeah, I called up Amari's dad, and he was thankful that I called, because he was upset and frustrated that this story blew up as big as it did. Now, I think there's a sense in my mind of perhaps, I think it's naive not to believe that this is what it's going to be when you're committed to a program like Wisconsin. According to him, they went on this trip with some other players that Amari has trained with over the years. So it was a group, but it was an official visit, which means Ohio State can pay for it. And they talked to the coaches. He did want to make it clear, and this is in the headline to my story, that Amari Latimer is committed to Wisconsin. He said, "Go Badgers." And this is how he framed the trip. He said, "I'm going to be honest, Ohio State is Ohio State. This is a bucket list type opportunity. We wanted to experience it, but I will also say that we had relationships with these coaches before we ever committed to Wisconsin." Ohio State's current running backs coach was recruiting Amari Latimer a couple of years ago when he was at Oregon. And that was the dad's way of saying, if we wanted to be at Ohio State, we would be at Ohio State. Another thing that he talked about was he's the athletic director at the high school where Amari plays, and Amari is in the middle of an amazing senior season. But he said, it's important to me to keep relationships open with a lot of these coaches. Now, you could do that perhaps without visiting, and I think that visiting opens the door to all these questions about what it means, which we can get into. But he also said, I want to be respectful of these coaches who are putting in the time. He said that this was our third game day visit this season, and we're going to go to more games. And when I asked which games they visited, he declined to address them because he said he didn't want things to get misconstrued or blown up. But he said that is how he and his son have bonded over the years through football. He said, that's how me and my dad bonded over the years. And I want to give him as many experiences as I can. Obviously, the signing period is in 2 months. I can understand everything that he's saying. Like, a lot of it makes sense. And I would also say, when you are committed to a program like Wisconsin and you take an OV to Ohio State, #1 ranked team in the country, defending national champions, whether you thought it was under the radar and wasn't supposed to be a big deal because you'd visited 2 other schools that not that many people apparently knew about, you have to understand what the implications are for that. And I would also say you can't go without at least some consideration of potentially thinking about Ohio State and playing there. So all of those things can all be true, but I understand why this is a big deal. Now, again, he tried to quell this as much as he could by saying, we are committed to Wisconsin. This program, when we committed, was coming off a losing season. So we've got really good relationships with the coaches. He said he talked to Devin Spalding every 2 to 3 weeks, and Amari talks to Devin a lot more than that. Devin deserved a lot of credit for pulling off this, at the time, recruiting victory. Again, we'll see what the next 2 months hold. But he also said that they're talking to 8 schools right now, or 8 schools have continued to reach out. And he said there are 2 schools that we just completely cut off because they were negative recruiting against Wisconsin. We don't tolerate that. But I'm willing to have a conversation with you every once in a while, just to hear what you have to say and to preserve these relationships. But he also said, I'm not going to talk to you every day. Now, if Coach Spalding calls me every day, I will talk to him every day. So again, some of these may sound like contradictory messaging, but I think he was massaging it as best he could by saying, we're still on board with Wisconsin, while also clearly being willing to talk to other schools. And I understand that perspective as well, because the last part of this goes to what's happening on the field. You have to be pragmatic about this entire situation. And he said, like, nothing's changed as far as how he feels about Wisconsin and Luke Fickell. And also, if something happens and a change is made, they're going to have to open up their options too. So this is the nature of recruiting, especially when you're a high-level high school prospect. And certainly every family handles it differently. But that is his side of things. And of course, obviously, his other son, Nyzier Latimer II, plays for Wisconsin, is the top nickel corner, and has another year of eligibility. So there's that factor here as well. They've got good relationships with Wisconsin, but you can't deny that the team is not giving a lot of recruits optimism for the future. I mean, that's reality right now.
It absolutely is. Amari Latimer, for the record, those wondering, you talk about the negative recruiting, he does not have an offer from Minnesota. So we can at least put that aside right now. It's not PJ Fleck this time, at least with him. But when you talk about the on-field product, it's one thing to have a losing season like it was a year ago, 5-7. It's another thing to look at this year where they just haven't been largely competitive. Now, they were competitive in the first half against Michigan and even into the third quarter, but they haven't even been competitive. A year ago, competitive against Ohio, against Penn State, competitive against Oregon. Certainly the trophy games did not go their way, but like, it has to be jarring for recruits. I just have to, it has to be. And especially guys like that, him and Jaden Pettit, guys that are not well, especially a wide receiver in Jaden Pettit, a wide, like, where Wisconsin doesn't have a ton of history being able to bring in those top tier guys. And just watching what's going on right now, I think it has to be tough for them to stay the course. But it sounds like his dad, Amari Latimer's dad, is just a guy that has a good moral compass, I guess is maybe the right way to say it. Is a real guy. He understands and recognizes that they have to be able to continue to keep open relationships with other people because they don't know what's going to happen at the end of the season for Wisconsin. If it continues to go down this path and this staff is not here anymore, you have to have those other relationships open and feel comfortable about putting your son into that situation very, very quickly. So I understand where he's coming from it. The fact that he didn't tell you those other schools, I think, is also a sign that legitimately doesn't want to put it out there that Wisconsin, they're looking around. So the Ohio State thing is interesting. I feel like I wonder if it's not like they told everybody that they were coming. I would assume it was the Ohio State recruiting people that told them that Amari Latimer was coming. And that's how that got out there. Again, he's a pretty highly ranked dude. They don't have a highly ranked running back in their class right now. They have a 3-star running back out of, I think it's Delaware, in that class right now. So it makes sense. But it's not just about Latimer. It's not just about Pettit. It's the entire recruiting class and the guys that you're trying to sign on. Saturday night's a huge recruiting night. There's a lot of guys that are high on Wisconsin's list, and a performance on the field is the most important. Relationships matter, money matters, but the performance on the field, I think, matters as much as anything. It's the easiest way to recruit, and that's what Luke Fickell said.
I would also say it's one thing to go to a game when you pay for the tickets and you sit in the stands and no one is supposed to know that you're there, which is what his dad said about perhaps some of these other visits. And yet the staff quickly found out and somebody came by to talk to them because that is the caliber of player Amari Latimer is. And it's another thing to take an OV where you're going to be on the sideline, you're wearing the pass with your name on it. Again, you have to understand that is going to get out there. So there is that aspect. But again, I don't fault the family for exploring these avenues. And he is saying the right things about the relationship with Wisconsin while, again, being pragmatic about what's happening. And I've said this before, a recruit to me is never or largely isn't going to make a decision off a single game, because if that's why you're making the decision, you probably shouldn't have gone there in the first place. But the totality of a tenure is a whole hell of a lot of a different story, because when they weren't winning even last year, or it wasn't at the level people wanted in year one, if you're a recruit and if you want to sell it to a recruit, you say, hey, just like how Barry Alvarez did when he first got here and maybe they weren't good, come be a part of something special. Come be a part of the change. You can come in and immediately impact things, and you can have a really special story here and develop something at Wisconsin or whatever other school. Well, you can sell that early on. And obviously there was great excitement in those first two full recruiting classes, both top 30 recruiting classes. But at a certain point, when it stacks up and there's a lack of results, you can try to sell that, but you also have to be realistic as a recruit and think, are these guys who are talking to me even going to be here? Is this opportunity going to be real? Because at a certain point, when you keep losing, you don't have the opportunity to continue on. And I'm not saying that's what's happening right now. Obviously, there's still 7 regular season games remaining. But I do go back to what Gavin Meyer said, because you may not like what he said, and you may not like that he's committed to Minnesota. But one of the things he said when I talked to him in March is, when I'm looking at Wisconsin, I have to think about the future. And a year from now, I can't definitively say this staff is still going to be here. Now, yes, that is true about a lot of other staffs. But the point is, that's somebody publicly putting it out there, and other people see that, and other people have to make their own decisions. And I think that is a realistic concern, especially at this point. And you have to look at the 2026 class and think, yeah, people view that in the same way as well, because they have 15 commits. They're ranked 58th in the country. As you mentioned, Zach, they only have 2 4-star prospects, and they're still trying to get maybe 3 more guys, potentially a couple safeties, potentially an outside linebacker, and it was going to be a smaller class. But it's not a class full of high-end blue chip type prospects. And I have to think that plays a role in it at a certain point, where people are just wondering about my future and what is it going to look like at this particular school. So absolutely, what happens over time has an impact in how you recruit. And as you said, Luke Fickell did talk about it.
I'm sure PJ Fleck appreciates you continuing to put out his message for everybody.
It's not, I'm putting it out because I think it's important. And it doesn't, if he had committed, we wouldn't be having the exact same Well,
We
you wouldn't
wouldn't
have
at
such
all.
disdain for it. You wouldn't have such disdain for it if it was any other school other than Minnesota. But the point still stands, and I think that is really important. And yeah, like losing a 3-star offensive lineman from Janesville, they can get other 3-star offensive linemen. The fact he's from the state makes it a thing. The fact he grew up wanting to play for the Badgers, and the fact he went to Minnesota makes it a thing. But it was the first time that I had heard someone say definitively, like, I don't know if Wisconsin, what's the staff going to look like a year from now? It's just not something I can recall hearing from a recruit. And if he's saying it, other people are saying it as well. And while Amari Latimer's dad didn't say the exact same thing, he did acknowledge that if there are changes made, we're going to have to explore all possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. But and you talk about not making a decision based off of one game, right? Like one game shouldn't decide whether you go to a school or not. One environment shouldn't decide whether you go to a school or not. I feel like, and this is probably unrealistic, I also don't think a coaching staff, and maybe it's different these days than it was before the transfer portal was what it is, right? Where you can pick up and go at the drop of a hat. But picking a school based on a coach is also not always the smartest thing either. You have to live there. You have to go to school there. You have to be a part of that community. And that's also important. Again, not as important as it used to be when it was much harder to get up and leave. But I think picking a school based on a coach is also perhaps not always the best choice either, even though a lot of kids do it. I get that. But yes, the Gavin Meyer thing is, you might be right that it is just because of PJ Fleck and because he does have a history of negative recruiting against Wisconsin and has accused Wisconsin of the same thing and all that, the rivalry that is there. Perhaps that's true. I just think it's just kind of insane considering how often his name is mentioned for other jobs every offseason. So to suggest that he has had more success certainly at Minnesota than Wisconsin has had under Luke Fickell, there's no doubt about that. But to suggest that he couldn't pick up and leave at the drop of a hat is kind of funny to me as well, just because it's what college coaches do, especially ones like him. So if he was ever given a real opportunity at a better school than Minnesota, and there's plenty of them, obviously, he would jump at it, I think, personally. Irrelevant to our conversation here, of course.
No, but I understand your comment. Yeah, well, I suppose we can agree to disagree in some regard. It's what Gavin said.
You like you think PJ Fleck is loyal and wouldn't stay if another better job came along?
Oh no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like the comment that Gavin made, and I think it's clouded because he's going to Minnesota. But either way, it's a real factor, and it's something that Wisconsin has to deal with now because some schools are going to negative recruit against you. Some families will listen to that, even if Amari Latimer's family isn't. But there are other schools that are just going to recruit and talk about how much they have to offer. And if you start looking across the road and seeing, well, what is it at Wisconsin, you might be willing to jump ship. And so, I mean, I don't ultimately know what Latimer is going to do when December 4th arrives. I know that the Badgers certainly hope that he signs with Wisconsin, but this just has to be a concern overall over the next 2 months when people are trying to figure out what's best for them. And it is, you're right, Zach, you've got to commit to a school, or people always talk about go to a school for everything it can offer and not the staff. And at the same time, especially if you are not from the area, you are going there because of the relationships you've developed with potentially a position coach over multiple years. Certainly, you don't really know that much about the school. You haven't had an opportunity to be around it more than probably one or two unofficials and one official. And when you can jump into the portal now in ways you couldn't previously, it's just easier to leave. So I don't know. There's a lot that Wisconsin has to figure out. But ultimately, what did Luke say? You got to win games. That's what makes it easier to recruit. And right now, Wisconsin isn't doing that. And also, you're looking at the product. It's not just that they're not winning. It's the way they're losing. If you're an offensive player, they're 118th in the country, I think, in run offense, 126th in total offense. Like their yards per carry is atrocious. And maybe you can think you come in and be the difference, but also you're probably wondering, well, what about these other guys who are going to be my teammates? And so it's there's a lot going on right now. That's for sure.
Plenty of it. And obviously they need to play better, and it'll help them in the recruiting department. And they have an opportunity to get back on the right track on Saturday night, because it's not going to be easy, especially offensively. And we'll talk more about that on Thursday. Just Iowa's defense. It may not be a legendary Iowa defense, but it is still the same tough, don't let you run the ball, get after the quarterback type of offense, and defense. That's going to be very tough for a Wisconsin offense to move the ball, because Wisconsin's offense hasn't moved the ball against nearly anybody this year. That said, it does sound like Hunter Simmons will be the guy under center again, assuming Billy Edwards Jr. is not healthy enough to play. He did not suit up last week. It looked like he had a significant brace on that knee at Michigan. So I would imagine we don't see him anytime soon, and that Hunter Simmons will continue to get the bulk of the reps. They said they'd have a plan for Danny again. I don't understand it. If a guy's playing well, there's just no reason to bring the other guy in. Now, again, I think Luke said he played 3 snaps. It seemed like it was more than that, but maybe that was just like the fact that he came in right away in the second drive. Maybe that just stayed with me a little bit more than the other 2 snaps. I don't know, but I don't like the switching in and out of guys, especially when the offense had success on that first drive. I would hope that they do the same thing on Saturday night against Michigan. Against Iowa, that you wouldn't bring Danny in to start the next drive. It just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But again, we'll talk more about it on Thursday. Is there anything else you wanted to hit recruiting wise before we talk a little coaching?
No, I think we're good. It's going to be probably a wild 2 months, I'm sure.
So at his press conference on Monday, Luke Fickell was asked about evaluating coaching, and this is not the first time he has talked about this aspect of how he evaluates coaches, but it was probably his most extensive comments on it. And that is, do they have their guys playing above their God-given ability, at their God-given ability, or below their God-given ability? And he referenced a offensive line coach, I think it must have been at Cincinnati, that came into him after the year and was like, I'm sorry, we weren't up to where we needed to be. It was not good enough and all that. And Luke's like, actually, you did a great job, because at one point you're starting 4 walk-ons and they played above their God-given ability. So yes, it wasn't where we needed to be, but it was above what we could, realistically expect. So taking that idea and looking at this coaching staff right now, is there any position, any players at their positions, they're playing above their God-given ability on a consistent basis? And I'll let you think about that for a second, because again, kind of like you did with me on Sunday, I didn't give you any idea that we were going to be talking about this, but the guy that he did mention was Darrell Peterson, who has played well this year. The stats maybe don't show it, but he has played well this year. And I think he's part of a front seven that has largely played well this year, and perhaps playing above what his God-given ability was coming in. I think the same thing could be said about Mason Rieger, and some of the other players, Ben Barton. So if we're looking at that, maybe EJ Whitlow is one of those guys that has some of his guys playing above their God-given ability. But staff-wide, I don't know that there's a ton of that happening.
This feels almost like an impossible question to answer, largely because how the hell can I measure what someone's so-called God-given ability is? What I can measure is statistically the production. And yeah, Darrell Peterson, like they always say, what, you can't measure the heart of a player or all that stuff. And that's fair. Sometimes you can see that show up. But overall, I have to judge it by the product you're putting on the field. And you may have a lot of effort plays, but are they turning into results? And I just can't sit here and say I've seen results from most any position group. There are some, and there are good plays and individual playmakers, no doubt. I just think that's incredibly difficult to judge. And I feel like you'd either have to go player by player or position by position. Running back wise, no. I mean, I think what we thought their ability would be much greater in terms of productivity. But again, that's how I'm measuring it. So much talent there with Darian Dupree and Dylan Jones, 4-star running backs who could have gone to a number of schools. This offense is averaging 3 yards a carry. Now, the offensive line hasn't run blocked very well. And you could say, okay, Davis Heinsohn playing above his God-given ability because you moved him to center. Joe Brunner's going to give you everything that he's got. And again, you could go one by one, but positionally speaking, like, you can't move the football. You've scored 20 points in your 2 games here, Big Ten games. That's terrible. So I don't know if I can look at it quite the same way, though I can understand and appreciate how Luke is viewing this. And maybe it's more of an after the season type of thing. Certainly, again, like outside linebacker play, defensively stopping the run, they've been pretty good and a heck of a lot better than we've seen the last couple of years. But on the whole, I just don't know if I see it, and it's extraordinarily difficult for me to judge without looking at the productivity or lack thereof.
Well, you asked for productivity. A year ago, Daryl Peterson had 1 tackle for loss and 1 sack. He's got 3 tackles for loss and a sack already here this season. Is that not more productive? Is that not better play from him than it was a year ago?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm not.
You asked for numbers. I gave you some numbers.
I'm not talking specifically about him. I'm talking about position to position and the team as a whole.
Okay.
It's a difficult thing to evaluate. And maybe I'm focused more offensively because they've been so bad.
Horrible.
Individually, there are guys like Vinny Anthony just caught 9 passes in a game. And he had a really good season a year ago. So individually, I think there are very good players, but you don't win football games, or at least we haven't seen it, with a singular individual play. You win it based on the team, and the team is just not anywhere close to being good enough.
Right. Again, the question was more about evaluating individual position groups.
Sure.
Because that's what Luke was talking about, right? Like he was asked, how do you evaluate coaches? Who's doing a good job? Who's not doing a good job? And I certainly think that there's guys on the defense that are playing above their God-given abilities. Again, you're right. It's hard to judge what exactly their God-given abilities are. Like what's that level and where are they at? But I feel like Mason Reiger has made himself into a better player than perhaps he should be based on his work ethic, right? And the amount of time that's put into it. Same thing with Daryl Peterson staying after practice and the effort that's put into that and trying to get to a better place. And I think EJ Whitlow would deserve credit there, because for as bad as the defensive line was a year ago and small, and Daryl Peterson was part of that defensive line and he was small. And again, I know outside linebacker, defensive line, Daryl's been playing with his hand on the ground a ton, more so than anything else this year. So I would count him along the defensive line. Same thing with Mason Reiger, even though they are edge guys in name. So that when I talk about that, I would say EJ Whitlow has done a better job this year than last year, but he's also been given better options than he had a year ago too. So I think that plays a factor. And so that again was the question behind it. But bigger picture, has that been the biggest failure for Luke Fickell as a coach of not getting the talent? Because you said it, they have individual talent. They've recruited well. They've hit the portal and gotten some guys that other schools wanted, and they managed to bring them here. Perhaps they didn't get all the guys they wanted, but has he been able to consistently get guys to play above their God-given ability?
No.
In the 2.5 years here?
No, I don't believe so. And I think you could ask why, and that's a hard question to answer, because it's like, then you can dovetail into these different topics of, oh, well, are they being coached hard enough or well enough, or are they motivated, or do they just not identify recruits or transfer portal talent in the way that they need to? I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but what I do know is 14-16 overall, 8-12 in the Big Ten since the start of the 2023 season, and in the midst of a season that could turn into 2-10, 3-9, 4-8. Take your pick. I don't think anybody thinks it's going to be better than that at this point, and 4 might feel like a stretch. So you need the talent, and if and when we arrive at a time for the epitaph on the tenure here, there are going to be so many different reasons why it didn't work out, going away from things that traditionally worked, although admittedly wasn't really working at the end of the Paul Chryst tenure. But talent wise, I said this before, look at on Sundays who's playing in the NFL. There are a lot of former Badgers. How many of those dudes have been around here now the last couple of years? Hunter Wohler and Jack Nelson got drafted. That's from the previous staff. And, Joe Huber ended up on a team, and that is this staff. They brought him over from Cincinnati. I don't know how many NFL type guys are on this roster. And I think that matters, having standout players. But there just has not been enough talent. And ultimately, at a certain point, you can't blame it on the previous staff. You've had many years now, 3 years, to overhaul the roster and bring in your own people. So I don't know exactly what the percentage of the pie is here, but the talent absolutely has to be a factor here. I mean, when you go into some of these games and think like, how can Wisconsin have a realistic chance? And I know there's injuries. Okay. I don't want to skate by the fact they've lost their starting quarterback the last 3 years and a lot of other things. But very rarely do I remember in previous regimes going to cover a game and thinking, Wisconsin's going to get smoked. It may have happened every now and again. So I don't know what that means or what that says, but it's a feeling that I have.
Well, I mean, the feeling is because it's happened, right? Like 11 times losing by 14 or more points in 31 games, where Paul Chryst had that happen 10 times in 93 games. So yes, now to be fair, several of those were in the last few years of his tenure. So it was trending that way anyways. But when they went to Alabama, I mean, I'll just go all the way back to, we can go back to last year. I mean, even in 2023, there were times where you're like, they're probably not going to be able to compete in this particular game. It was the games against teams that they should have beaten the crap out of was the first, I think, warning sign that something wasn't right? Like at Indiana, home to Northwestern, those games and the way that they lost them, I don't know if they were the first warning signs, but they were significant, huge blinking red lights like, uh-oh. And so going into 2024, you kind of like, let's wait to see what it is. Never expected them to compete expected them to compete with Alabama, even though that game was at home. And that's been a rarity where a team would come in and you thought Wisconsin didn't have a chance at home and proved to be correct. And they had no chance. And then the Penn State game and the Oregon game, you're like, well, maybe they can compete with these teams. And then the season ends the way it is. And then you come into 2025 and you look at the schedule and you're like, not going to compete against Alabama, probably not going to compete against Michigan, probably not going to compete Ohio State, Oregon, maybe Indiana. But Maryland, yes, you should be able to compete against Maryland. You have just as much, if not more talent than Maryland. You can't, and they just haven't played up to that at all. And I think that is on coaching as much as anything. So it's tough. It's tough. All right, let's jump into a little overreaction or no. Overreaction or no. Nyzier Fourqurean will never play a down for Wisconsin again.
Honestly, doesn't feel like an overreaction to me at all right now. I feel like I should just clear out, stand in the corner, and let you go one-on-one from the top of the key, because I know this is a topic that you'd like to address. But obviously, this whole thing is absolutely absurd. If he's not going to play, okay, but make a damn decision and get it over with so everybody knows. So he's not hanging on by a thread here wondering what his future is going to be. Obviously, he's been battling this for multiple months. And yes, this was always going to be a possibility dating back even to the spring. But still, figure it out one way or the other. And if he's going to play, then let him play. So I will stand in the corner, and whenever you desire to break down a couple guys and pass me the rock, I'll be here.
I mean, there's no change to the docket in the last 2 weeks. There hasn't been an update since September 23rd. the injunction that they're asking for is to avoid the harm that is being done right now. You can't get the games back. He's missed 5 games. You can't get those games back. That is damage that can't be undone. I don't know why the judge has not ruled on this at this point. I don't know what he's waiting for, and obviously we don't know what he's waiting for. It's the same judge, and I know a lot of people are blaming the NCAA. And first of all, they are the ones that denied the waiver in the first place, and a lot of people are like, "Well, it's he's looking for a 6th year; he shouldn't get it anyways." And that's completely a fine thing to think and want to hold on to, and be like, he really shouldn't have a case anyways. But he does have a case, and the judge who ruled initially on the injunction that eventually got overturned is the one that's supposed to be ruling on this, and he hasn't done a single thing in at least 2 weeks. The purpose of the injunction is to avoid the harm that's being done, and for them to continue not to rule on it, to give him some decision, as you said, is a bunch of bullshit. You have to let him know one way or the other. If you want to say no to the injunction and force this trial, and the trial kept on getting pushed off, it's not till I think like March or April now, which isn't going to matter for Nyzier, of course, but you have to give him something. You have left him in limbo since July. This is quite honestly ridiculous on a number of levels, but the judge is the one that is holding this up at this point, not the NCAA. It's the judge. And to have an injunction that is merely being asked for so that the harm that is currently being done doesn't happen, and you don't rule on it, and you don't give any kind of an update the last couple of weeks is unfortunate. And I know court cases move slowly, but injunctions should not. One way or the other, make a ruling, and we can move on with our lives. I just think it's just insane that nothing has happened at this point. I know there's probably lawyers listening to this that are like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And that is a guarantee. I have zero idea when it comes to the intricacies of the court process, but I do know what the injunction is for, and they have stated what it's for. And right now, it's the harm that's being done cannot be undone. And so, yes, make a decision, and let's move on, and let Nyzier move on, and we can all put this behind us or let him play. And I know there's a lot of people like, well, just let the young kids play because it doesn't matter at this point. That's completely fair. What's not fair is leaving Nyzier out here to hang in the wind, just blowing. That's not fair. If you want the young guys to play, fine. But this is not fair to Nyzier Fourqurean. And yes, he put himself out there in terms of not really knowing for sure that he was going to be able to play. That is what it is. Right now, he deserves an answer for me, personally.
Well put, Zach. And yes, you can say it doesn't matter and let the young guys play, but you know who it does matter to? Nyzier Fourqurean. It's not just the football season, it's his life and trying to figure out what he's going to do next. And if it's not going to happen, then he can, does he still need to travel with the team? He may want to, but he may want to just begin training for potential future in the pros. And I don't know whether that's going to materialize. Certainly what he did on the field the last couple of years were good. This year would have been something that could have elevated him. But yeah, you're right, Zach. He needs to know so that he can move on with his life.
Yeah. A couple others here. The loss of Preston Zachman has been a bigger loss than Billy Edwards being out. Ooh, overreaction or no?
Very good question, but I will say overreaction because we're talking about a quarterback who you were going to pay a lot of money to, or still are on the hook to pay a lot of money to. And now you're forced down the line that your third string quarterback who wasn't on the roster in the spring is starting now. Preston, obviously we sort of have taken him for granted because he's not a loud rah guy. He just does his job, had those couple of interceptions early. And we know that the pass defense hasn't been what it's needed to be, especially in some of these losses. But come on, we're talking about a quarterback who has the ball in his hands on every single play. And I have no idea what this offense would look like if he was in the mix. He got to his third series in the opener. Then he played one series. That's it. So I'm not going to pretend like it'd be a top 20 offense. But you can't tell me they'd be 120th.
I would agree with that. Last one, overreaction or no? quarterback injuries are the biggest what if of the Luke Fickell era?
I mean, my biggest what if is if you just kept Jim Leonard, but that I suppose predates
the Luke Fickell era.
Yeah, I think so. And I'd probably need more time to come up with the alternatives. But a what if means something you have that's, I think, taken away from you. Like, people always ask the what if about the 2011 season. What if JJ Watt had stayed, right? It comes up all the time. Oh my God, they could have won a national championship. Well, okay, but that was never real because he was a first round draft pick. So, like, that never made sense to me, even though it was a fun game to play. But the what if for the quarterbacks is they were here. They opened the season as the starter. And then in the case of Tyler Van Dyke, and we'll see with Billy Edwards Jr., you never see him again. I think that's valid. Again, I think from what we've seen, it's hard to feel like they would have magically transformed into some great team, but they've been significantly hindered by backup quarterback play. Other what ifs I'd really have to think about. I mean, what if you didn't hire Phil Longo? What if you had an offense that resembled more of what Wisconsin was used to? What if you got better players? I don't know. I don't know what it is. What if you knew Wisconsin better? What if you didn't just talk about knowing the culture, but you had a better understanding? And that's not fair because how could he know? But since we're playing the what if game, just trying to come up with different ones.
I mean, good coaches and coaches that have a plan for their life would know what they were getting into before jumping into it. That's irrelevant. The other, we always talk about the JJ Watt 2011. You're right. He was not there. The one that Brett Bielema brings up when you'll ask him about it is Devin Smith, and losing Devin Smith in the second game against Oregon State, he broke his foot and they didn't have him. That's the one he'll talk about because he was actually on the team. And would that have been such a huge change to help them get past the likes of Michigan State and Ohio State in those back-to-back weeks where they lost on virtual Hail Marys on both of them? Maybe. Would the defense have been better with Devin Smith at corner? Absolutely. So I can understand that one, and it makes a lot more sense. It's not as fun as the J.J. Watt one because all you're thinking is J.J. Watt at the end of the 2010 Iowa game making plays on the quarterback, not allowing, making a big sack, and Iowa's not able to go down and kick the field goal. If J.J. Watt's on the field in 2011, does Kirk Cousins ever get that pass off for the Hail Mary? Does same thing the next week with Ohio State? Does he make enough plays that it's not even that game? But what we have to remember in those two games is Russell Wilson was superhuman, and bringing them back and getting the one game tied and taking the lead in the other one, like he was superhuman. So it's not like, that was insane. And yes, JJ Watt would have been nice, but I know Brett Bielema brings up the Devin Williams or the Devin Smith one a lot more than JJ Watt. I wonder if that 2011 team is Brett Bielema's like one that it's like Barry's 2000 team. Had certain things like injuries pop up, and then the shoebox. It was your most talented team, and then all of a sudden, certain things happened, and you could have been so much better.
I not to get too off the track here from talking about the current team, but I can vaguely remember that press conference at the Rose Bowl because that was my first season covering Wisconsin. How gutted Brett was after the loss, and I think he said something to the effect of, "This is the kind of game that sticks with you for the rest of your life." And I don't know how much he's thinking about it in this moment, trying to get Illinois ready for a game, but like that was crushing to have a team that good and somehow lose 3 games. But to throw it back to the question that you asked, what would you say your answer is for the biggest what if? Would you go with the quarterbacks, or is there something else that you would put this on?
Absolutely. I actually asked Chris McIntosh about it out at Big Ten Media Days, whether you have to take that into account when you evaluate a coach and whether he thinks about it at all. And I mean, he said no, but I think if he's being honest with himself, you have to at least acknowledge it. You can't sit here and say that you lost your starting quarterback 3 straight years and not be like, it doesn't affect us. And I'm sure there are people that are upset we're even, talk about this because so much else is just not good enough. So while, yes, you would love to have your starting quarterback because it just makes such a huge difference. And the guy that you count on, the guy that the team rallies around, the time, all that stuff means something. It does. But it doesn't mean that your offensive line blocks better, or you stop the run better, or you stop the pass better, or you can get after the quarterback better. That has nothing to do with the quarterback. And so there are so many other things wrong with the things that have happened the last 2.5 years that, while it is a huge what if, and probably the biggest what if, at least for me, that I don't know that it would have mattered such to a significant degree that things would be totally different than they are right now. Would they have made a bowl game last year? Probably. I think so. But you'd still be feeling very, very unsure about the future of what it is. I also think the Phil Longo thing is right up there by it. But Phil didn't have a starting quarterback for large stretches either. But that decision to go that way without the knowledge or without the, I guess, ability to come together and understand exactly what the offense was going to look like before you hired him, and you understood that he was going to be willing to adapt and change, as opposed to the wall that he ended up being in that respect, is also significant, very significant. So there's a lot there, Jesse, for sure. There's a lot of what ifs, I would say, for sure. And this whole era of Wisconsin football, a lot of what ifs and what could have been, but they are where they are right now, and that is getting ready for Iowa coming up on Saturday night, looking to avoid a fourth straight loss in this series, trying to get the Heartland Trophy back and perhaps right some wrongs from a year ago. And we'll talk more about that coming up on Thursday. All right. Talk to you then, Jesse. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Talk soon.
All right. There is Jesse Temple from Badger Connect. You've been listening to The Camp.